In the mid-1990s, I felt led of God to try to do something different with my ministry. I felt led outside of the walls of the church to minister to people who were not connected to the local church. Starting a new ministry that became known as FaithWorks was an exciting endeavor, but it was like starting a new business, and there were many things that I had not considered. In 1995, we began the ministry. In the fall of 1996, my wife and I were completely broke. We had run through our credit cards, we had run through our checking account, we had robbed our children of every penny that was in their piggy bank, and we were absolutely poor. Looking at bankruptcy, the power was being threatened to cut off, the water was cut off, the bank was calling almost every day, wanting to know where the mortgage payment was, wanting to know about this overdraft. And it was a very, very, very dark and difficult time for my family. I remember very well sitting down with my wife in November of 1996 and looking at her and telling her that we were not going to have Christmas that year. I can see the look of despair on her face. And I was totally dejected, felt completely abandoned of God. She got up and went back to the bedroom. And I got up and I went into the little office that I was using at the house. And I had a very honest discussion with God. I was really angry. I yelled at him and I said, "Why are you doing this to me? I did this for you, and you have forsaken me. Why have you forsaken me, God?" I was throwing papers, I was throwing books, I threw the telephone. I was pitching a real fit before God. Somewhat embarrassed about that. But that was really probably the first real honest conversation that I'd had with God in a long, long time. After that prayer, I went to the mailbox the next day, and there was a check for $3,000 unsolicited from someone. I was grateful for that, but that was going to take the wolf off the door from the ministry for a little bit. It wasn't really going to help us. But the next day I went to the mailbox, and there was another check for $2,500. And I was able to go to my wife and say, we are going to be able to have a little Christmas this year. At that time, I was doing counseling for people that worked for some of the different businesses in town, and one of the people had called me, and now it was Christmas Eve of 1996. I sat in a Sunday school room of a local church with one of the people who had called me for help. She began to talk, and she talked for almost 2 hours, not really saying anything. And I began to feel anxious for time. I began to cut off the conversation. And just as I was beginning to get ready to leave, she looked at me and she said, I had to tell my children that we were not going to have Christmas this year. And I knew exactly how she felt. The miracle of the story really is what happened when I went home right after that conversation. I sat down and I told my wife what the lady had said to me, thinking that my wife was going to say, "Oh no, we can't do that. I know what you're going to want to do." But my wife said, "We're going to have to give them Christmas, aren't we?" And I said, "Yes, but I don't know how." And she began to talk about how a couple in our Sunday school class were getting new bicycles for their children. And she said, maybe they'll give us their old bicycles. We called them up and they said, no, they were going to keep the bicycles for cousins that might come and play. But they knew someone else that had won a bicycle and maybe they'd give us their old one. And we called them. And they said, sure, you can have the bike. And as soon as we hung up the phone, the first couple called back and said, we'll give you those bicycles. To make a long story short, within 30 minutes, we had 3 bicycles, we had new tires, we had a bicycle pump, we had 5 bags of groceries, we had 3 teddy bears, and we had someone that was promising a gift certificate to Winn-Dixie. I sat there in my living room just amazed at what God had done with an outpouring of leading others to help this one family. But I knew I was also had a problem. I drove a little 2-door car. I didn't know how I was going to pick all that up and get it delivered. When the person with the gift certificate drove up in a pickup truck, we swapped cars and trucks, and my 10-year-old son got in the truck with me. And we went off and gathered all of the promised gifts together and drove them over into Brunswick. We parked down the street from the lady's house, went and knocked on the door, two sets of eyes peered out of the door, little children who didn't know who I was. They said their mother wasn't there, and they said their father wasn't there. And so I went back to the car. And just as I was getting back in the truck, a car came speeding past me, slammed on brakes, smoke came out of the tires. And then this big, greasy man got out of the car and he began to yell at the children who had come out on the porch and telling them to get back in the house. And he began stomping down towards my truck. I looked at my son and his eyes were as big as silver dollars. He didn't know what was going to happen, and neither did I. I got out of the truck and I called the gentleman by name, thinking that it must be the husband of the woman that I was trying to help. He said, I might be. I said, are you Linda's husband? He said, I might be. And I told him I had Christmas for him in the truck. He said, what do you mean? I said, I've got Christmas for you in the truck. He looked in the truck and saw all of the gifts. He said, drive around the corner. And we began to unload those gifts into the street. And this big, greasy man began to cry. And he said, I always believed in miracles. I never knowed I'd get one. And I knew exactly how he felt. FaithWorks is a ministry that seeks to minister beyond the walls of the church. And we've discovered that God is everywhere. I thought I was going to take God to God-forsaken places. But the truth of the matter is, there are no God-forsaken places. God lives in the gardens of Sea Island and in the bushes of Brunswick. He lives along the neighborhoods of Frederica Road and along the neighborhoods of Norwich Street. He lives in the beautiful churches that dot Glenn County, and he lives in the emergency room and the critical care units of Southeast Georgia Health System. There are no God-forsaken places. I'm Wright Culpepper, and that's how faith works for me.